Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are, whenever you're actually watching this, and welcome to the inaugural Emerging Practice Fishbowl. My name's Nick Richmond. I'm a Director of Design at Tricordant. I've been supporting the development of OD&D over the past 20 or 30 years, maybe not 30 years, but 20 or so years. With the world changing more and more rapidly each year, I think we've all kind of recognized in our practice that OD&D is changing. And I wanted to set up something different because I've been listening to podcasts and I've been participating in various other interventions, but I just want to go beyond that kind of one person being interviewed in a podcast, but rather a conversation that engages a wider group of people, maybe something that challenges the status quo, helps us to hear from others, to share what we're doing, to kind of share the edges of practice, um, and see what's emerging. So today's not a webinar in the usual sense, it's more of a conversation. And we're using a fishbowl process, and I'm not sure if you've used a fishbowl process before, but I'll explain that in a little bit. So it's a chance to explore what's actually changing in org design and development, so we can all make sense of that and learn together. So today's topic is how is AI changing OD&D practice? So our starting point is this. So AI is not replacing OD practice. It's really reweighing it. So as the burden of note-taking, synthesis, analysis, and drafting reduces the human work, so that reduces the human work of OD becomes more visible, more valuable. So that's becoming framing better questions, spotting patterns earlier, holding dynamics in the room, um, helping leaders make clearer, more systematic choices. So the question we're exploring in this inaugural emerging practice conversation is, what does it actually look and feel like to practice OD with AI alongside you? To explore this question, I've invited three brilliant provocateurs who I've listened to and I love speaking to, and they each bring a different but complementary perspective. So we've got Tim de Boer, Chief Exec of Reconfig, working at the forefront of organizational digital twins and helping organizations redesign their operating model for a human plus AI future. Parag Gogate, so Parag is Head of Innovation and Business Change at Sprint Reply. He's leading on work that's AI-enabled business improvement, intelligent automation, and operational transformation. And Dr. Chantelle Larsen, who's strategic advisor and chair cross tech face women in AI governance and founder and chief executive of Systematic X. So Chantelle works at the intersection of org design, AI governance, and ethical transformation. So for those who don't know what a fishbowl is, we're going to explain that now. So this means that the provocateurs will explore maybe two rounds of questions and then we'll open up the fishbowl so you can step into the discussion. If you're an observer, your role is to actively listen and to formulate a question you'd like to explore. So this may be listening for, what assumptions to challenge, what tensions feel unresolved, what this might mean in practice for your organization. Do write your questions into chat, because even if we don't answer them now, maybe you'll answer them in one of the future emerging practice conversations. So after a couple of rounds, I'll open up the fishbowl for observers to join. I'll invite you one at a time into the fishbowl. You'll share your question and participate in the fishbowl. After we've discussed your question, you'll then virtually step out of the fishbowl and I'll invite the next person in and the process continues. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. I just see there's a couple more people trying to join. So to warm us up and to get the juices flowing, I'm going to ask each of our provocateurs to answer the following, and we're going to give them each a couple of minutes to do so. So what is the one thing changing in OD&D practice because AI is now in the room? And the one thing that must deeply and irreducibly remain human? Who would like to go first? I'm going to nominate Parag.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start with a position based on the work I've been doing for the last few years, which, as Nick said, is the intersection of AI, but also operational improvements. My background is operations management before I started this work. And quite a fundamental question that always comes is, are we redesigning around AI? So is AI as a bolt-on to the way of working, or are we taking a step back and relooking at our operating models and rethinking, is something going to change fundamentally? Why even we do this work in the first place? And then fundamentally the work around, well, this challenge is not new as such in that from industry 1.0 to let's say 5.0 where we are now, it's the same challenge around human machine interaction. But what is changing in our experience or in my experience is the way what we call collective intelligence evolves on how humans are using AI in their day-to-day work without you even realizing. So there's a shadow operating model that is emerging quite often, which is not what operating model you see on a piece of paper. So my thought process around that is going from a bounded predictive way of working that was in the last however many years when we were designing operating models or org design, a lot of emergence is happening, a lot of shadow work is happening. And how do we pay attention to that? And AI, in our view, makes it slightly challenging, especially Gen AI. I'm talking about not just AI in a general sense, but generative AI is really changing that on a day-to-day basis at an operational level. So that's kind of my starting point. The practice remains, however, the way we do organization design changes fundamentally. And that change in our practices, let's take a step back and rethink the work before we even introduce AI.
Thanks, Parag. Chantelle.
So I agree, it's nothing new. Just the level of generative means that the interaction makes it easier. And what it's fundamentally done is made humans a machine. So it is that apprentice. I don't call it a PhD because the apprentice needs to understand what's the task, what model do I have? There is no one perfect model either, to do the role. What tools do I have? And so what that means is from an OD practitioner point of view, what I spend a lot of my time doing is working with organizations to rethink the whole job architecture, and which is nothing new though, but the scale that is operating in like, how does work actually get done? Who does that work? How do they connect? How do you have a level of awareness between the machine and between the human so that everyone has that information? And we've always talked about collaboration, tacit knowledge, implicit knowledge. I mean, these are the nuts and bolts of OD, really. So for me, it doesn't fundamentally change, but we never, and I mean this, even me, we never really went human. Like if you go back through every single piece of research, which I have done because that's what my research was in, it's always the human design flaw. We've never really done human design. Even now we hear AI first, and we shouldn't be doing AI first. It is human design. A couple of the board sessions that I was in last week, trust is a big issue in terms of adoption. Capacity, the amount of volume coming out. We're saying actually, there's less human work. There's actually more human work because we haven't designed human first. We haven't actually designed what's coming out in order for the humans to even absorb. So if 23,000 documents are created over a weekend for one person, what are they supposed to do with that? Because it's what's fundamentally changed is AI, as my AI or the bits that I architect, are working asynchronously whilst you're sleeping, whilst you're doing other tasks, and we have a volume issue because we're not doing human design. Where I slightly disagree with Parag then is the fundamental questions are still the same. What problem are you solving? Who are you serving, whether it be an employee or customer? What experience should they have? What does that mean in terms of automation and or AI, or even, God forbid, a human actually doing that task? So we're going through a little bit of an evolution at the moment where businesses think that I have been in rooms where they've cut HR out of this design and they've given it to the business. I'll be honest, brutally honest, right? They don't see it as a human piece. They see it as an IT piece, or they don't see HR or OD as capable. And I think this is going to come full circle in that we need to be in those rooms. We need to be jointly working through and resolving this in a very human way, because my research and the work that I do shows that unless you do this, you don't get an ROI and you can't absorb that. And it fundamentally has detrimental impacts.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Chantelle. And over to you, Tim.
So building upon what Chantelle said, but also contradicting her a bit because we're provocateurs, I don't agree that the first question should be what problems are we solving in the organization. We used to do that, but we don't have time for that. So Russell Eckhoff already in the 1970s said you need to start with idealized design. And that was a very nice article at the time, but it didn't work because we didn't have the technology to do it. So you can dream, you can think about what your organization can be, but it was very hard to simulate it, let alone implement it. So we do ask the question, what are your strategic ambitions? And then with AI, you can make a simulation of your target operating model. Now, of course, you still need to analyze the current state. So we do network analysis, we do spans and layers, and all those things that are in the world of organization design. But more importantly is the question, how are you going to implement your target operating model? And that's a typical question for boardrooms now, because they challenge me very often. They say, well, this is great. Now we have a simulation of our target operating model. We have the division of labor between AI and people, and we have the AI maturity level defined and all of that. And we have agentic AI, generative AI, etc. But how realistic is it? And the answer that I always give back is it depends on the capability to absorb change. And that's where the OD people in the room come in. And I think it's much more important, the work that you're doing now, than you've been doing the last 20 years, because it's all about how much change can people take. We've been doing workshops also together with Nick, where people were shocked, like, oh man, my world is gone. I'm obsolete. I'm a dinosaur. And then, of course, you put an arm around them. You say, hey, come on, your expertise is more valuable. So it's a very deep, and that's the second question Nick was asking. There's a very deep human side to it. So the work gets more technical. You need to still know the MVP of so the net present value of a transformation effort. So you need to be able to do the calculus. At least you need to understand what's on the screen. But you also need to be able to take a board member by the hand that's in his late 50s that says, I don't understand the world anymore.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Can I come back on the provocateur?
Yeah, why not? Come on. I mean, I'm loving the generative tension in this. It's fantastic.
Two things. I go to a lot of sessions. I'm invited to a lot of sessions. And it was a public session, Novo Nordisk, about 4 weeks ago. You don't bring change in after design. Change starts at the beginning. It's not a management, it's an activation. Unfortunately, they didn't ask what problem do they solve. Therefore, it failed and they wasted a whole load of money because they waited to the point that you said. That's one. Two, my whole doctorate went into bias. So part of the parameters is bias. AI is very, very biased. I lectured that in Cambridge University. And if you rely on a model to then define your problems, especially in the organization, you'll get into a workday situation that they are currently in. So if you then get it, and I design digital twins as well, if you then do that, you're going down a very slippery path, which doesn't count for a lot of data missing or representative for women. Women make up most of the work, a lot of the workforce as well. Black people usually completely not in there. Neurodiversity usually completely not in there. AI doesn't know context, doesn't know what it doesn't know. And so I would actually, this is why I say what problem you're solving is a very human question to make sure you ask up front. So change is front and center from the beginning. Otherwise, you get into bias issues. The second piece that I'm doing is working with the apparatus model, the sovereign model in Switzerland, to make bias visible, because my research continues. And even they have admitted that they have huge gender inequality problems within their model that needs to be fixed. So it doesn't matter which model you take. Even an open model, you will run into problems with bias. And if you rely on that, then you will have challenges as an OD professional.
Fantastic. So what I'm hearing already is, as I said just a moment ago, I'm loving the generative tension that's setting up here. That's great. Let's keep on exploring those differences. But also there's stuff around human discernment is going to be really, really important. We can't just go with whatever the machine says, but rather, that space in which only humans can really make those decisions around direction of travel, the ethical implications, sustainability decisions, and that kind of stuff. But equally, I think I didn't hear the words necessarily, but it really made my mind go to, what remains humans very much working with people through the transition of change. So that may be as simple as in a workshop observing the body language and group dynamics of an organization and the people in the room, which AI just won't do. And won't be able to read the nuancing of the words and understanding. But AI still has a real kind of strength to play, and that's really about supporting us in the process of the work that we do, whether development or design. So whether it's for like interviews, you could be better prepared for those interviews because you've been able to gather information that can support your business acumen of that part of the organization or that organization and the person that you're about to speak to. And I certainly do that in advance of my interviews. I kind of gather that. I use an AI to help me understand what's going on for that particular individual in light of the environmental factors, in light of the information that we know about the organization. And there's a whole range of other things. So, but Chantelle also mentioned something about I think it was you, Chantelle, that talked about the overwhelm of information because, how can one person deal with, what did you say, 26,000 documents by Monday, so to speak? That's just impossible to manage. And I was experiencing some of that in a recent project as well. Just because you can get AI to analyze everything in the world doesn't mean you should, because all you end up getting to is paralysis by analysis. And actually, it's discernment and thinking through what is the most important things that we need to know to make this decision, to help us inform this thinking, etc., etc.
It's different. One is that you're talking about the analysis in terms of, for example, a research agent or a competitor analysis, but it was also the outputs. This is a tech company. This is the outputs. So someone, human in the loop, or whether you choose to use AI in the loop, there is an output. It becomes a stau, it becomes a flood that's blocked. So these outputs that then need to have something. So the whole end-to-end workflow design, OD is holistic, isn't there, because most are designing on like chat, which burns out your brain and a number of things, but it's like that's so it's the two things, information overload, but also output overload, I would say then.
And one leads to the other, right? Output overload leads to information overload, leads to paralysis. So I certainly can see all that connecting. So right, so that was a warm-up, and hopefully we got the juices flowing. So is everyone ready for round one? Yeah, hopefully so. So let's go. Ding, 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 I'd say. Round one, let's get into operating model territory. Where are you seeing AI initiatives fail because the operating model and the org design haven't changed, and what actually is needed to shift to make it work? So Parag, I'm going to come back to you first as well. Let's start with you and then over to Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So we do a lot of work around, as I said earlier, on operational excellence, intersection of that with AI. Our work is never in isolation with, here's the technology, just go and start using it. Right from day one, and something that Chantelle mentioned, change is baked in from the start to say, well, how is it going to fundamentally change somebody's way of working? To give you a very simple example, one of the clients we worked with, they had to redo their whole KPIs. One of the KPIs they had was, it's a contact center operation. And as you know, or some of you may know, contact center operations, one of the KPIs always is the time it takes to respond to a particular complaint, for example. Well, guess what? With AI in the mix, for this particular organization, they started to respond to those complaints quite quickly. So they had an average of 26 minutes. It came down to 5 minutes because AI was able to draft responses, come up with a lot of things. It had a knock-on impact where the customers started to complain that you're not considering my complaint properly because you're responding to me way quicker than I am anticipating. So they had to rethink, well, hang on a second, what should be the KPI we measure going forward? Because efficiency was smashed from their target's perspective. So they had to put more focus on How do we tune up, augment our responsiveness, the customer experience, because AI is doing the background work of matching complaint to policies and responses. So if that fundamentally is not addressed during operating model design, all you get is highly efficient, in some cases biased, as Chantelle mentioned, because you have to go through a lot of bias testing, automated bias process, but you're not having the desired impact, let's say in this particular example, from a customer service perspective. In fact, quite the opposite. So operating model, a sum of people, process, technology has to be considered quite early on in the design. If it's not, adoption becomes a challenge. Your ROIs don't come through, as Tim was mentioning earlier on. And that requires a focused effort from all stakeholders involved in this particular initiative. So it's not a technology project at all. It's a organization change from the onset.
And what actually needs to shift to make it work, Parag?
Early conversations. So when we work with clients, it's all about bringing the right stakeholders on the room and say, fundamentally, you're going to work in a very different way. Let's explore that work now rather than put an AI solution in place. What if scenarios? What if you completely redesign your process? What if we do it in a way that was not possible 10 years ago because technology wasn't there?
Mm.
Instead of a typical form filling online where you go in, fill a form in, what if there's a natural language form filling in that happens through AI and the form is automatically filled in the background, presented back to the user? These are different ways we explore through what we call AI apprentice sessions, something what Chantelle said. We actually run simulations in the room with key stakeholders, 2-day ideation workshops before we do anything to explore possibilities. What if you don't have any constraints today? What if there is no box existing? Let's do that first. And we bring all the senior stakeholders, run that AI apprentice session using AI, of course, do simulations, do problem solution matching. And then we start discussing, well, what's the idealized future? What is the new way of working looking like? And let's build from there in terms of what's possible and what's not. Because AI is not the answer to everything. Let's be clear on that.
Yeah.
Just because it can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. Amen to that. Tim?
Yeah, like what you say, that AI is not the answer to everything, but it also depends how you use it. So what I see go wrong very often is organizations are unstructured. There is some legacy that should have been taken care of like 20 years ago, and now AI comes, and now people think that it will solve it. It's only going to aggravate it. It's only going to make it worse. So to be more specific, for example, if you do AI at scale, you need to really think about the sequence of what you're going to do first and what you're going to do later. So we do a lot of work also together with Nick for the NHS. And there, for example, you look at the ward administration. So the ward is where people are being operated and they sleep in the hospital over. So it's a lot of administration. Now you can do ambient listening through AI, but first of all, there's a process that would stop if now the machine captures the information about the patient and then somebody else needs to type it into another system. So you need to first of all redesign the whole flow. But more importantly, if you look at hospitals, they consist of multiple wards. And since they're a professional organization, very often they are managed differently because professionals have a great virtue that they know what to do, but they do it all in a different way. So standardization should come first and then the AI automation comes later. So if you're really talking about ROI, we say don't start with the AI in the first place, but first look at your processes and standardize across your whole organization, and then you can implement the AI and do it once for good. Of course, you need to then take care of the mentoring, the ownership, the Raki metrics, etc. But that's not how people at this moment think. So that's the target operating model design in an AI-powered process.
So we've had Parag talk about KPIs, the customer experience op model, early conversations. Tim is starting to talk about AI will expose the operating model. You can't just leap straight in and throw it at it. And I've certainly seen that where organizations have thrown AI at the wall and hoped for the best. as opposed to being more strategic and thinking carefully around how they're going to integrate AI into an operating model so that they have a truly enhanced AI operating model. You talked about standardization. So Chantelle, where are you going to go with this particular question?
I agree with parts of both, and
Yeah.
most of it, to be honest. But there are some things. So I come from this standardized process piece of Capgemini, and there's a reason that it won't work in all circumstances in AI, because it will just perpetuate what's there. And there are many systems that are broken or fractured in organizations. So I do agree with the rethink. There is a need to rethink and reimagine to bring them to. But starting with, is it either the employee or the customer? Like, what is it that we need? Because, for example, with call centers, if your population is the older population, do you really want to bring an AI in? I flew back over to London. I'm on the phone for my mum, sorting several different things out because she can't, she's 76 and she doesn't want that. So it is really a need to rethink, those processes. What I do and what I've been doing is I have an AI that basically goes throughout and says to you, by every job, what is it that the human's doing, the AI is doing? What are the future skills that's needed? What are the career paths? Because actually we're fundamentally breaking the organization, the motivation, and, God forbid, the apprentices or the people that have been out of work for 2 to 3 years at the very junior level. So I think there's a rethink of also the career paths that need to be done. I just wanted to bring that in. And then in doing that, it is really looking at the collaboration. And what's missing to me is actually the budget to do this. I was in an IAPP, which is I lead on AI governance for Europe. It's a privacy session in Microsoft with 5 other companies. And they were talking about how the AI has an organizational ID. But that organizational ID to me means, okay, now you're positioning it as if it's an employee. What's your budget for transformation? You've obviously given your budget, your license to Microsoft. Their answer was 0. So they have 0 budget for transformation, but yet they're landing, AI in there. So we are talking about this here that, we need to bring in new job architecture. We need to do the process stuff, whether it's rethink or standardize. But the thing missing is really the come to Jesus moment. I call it, like, well, actually, we need to do some transformation work around this, and it's going to cost some money.
Yeah.
My clients asked me last year, because I've been building workflows with them. The second thing then is training. We need proper human and AI literacy. So I train them to rethink the whole of, whether it be in the business or whether they be in HR, rethink the whole of the systems, because there are new roles that come in. So in my talent acquisition challenger workflow, things like explainability, because HR is high risk, you need to have, how did the AI reach that decision? And then the piece I just want to pick up on KPIs, it's really important. It came up at the board session last week and in a trustworthy AI circle that I'm part of. We don't have the right metrics, not just at the call centers, but at the board level. There is the shareholder value, but we've lost sight of long-term customer value or trust in these things, and they're driving the wrong behaviors. So bringing these things into place, we need to rethink the metrics. So rethink organization, design, structure. I mean, the basics, everyone here is an OD, so I know they know the basics of that. Training and literacy being the foundation, but driving and what you measure actually needs to change, and what you reward actually needs to change as well.
Yeah. It sounds like you've kind of worked your way around the Galbraith star model, and as you're saying, I was like, yeah, tick, tick, tick. I could certainly see that. Yeah. So I'm going to stay with you, Chantelle, for this next question, if you want to start, and then let's see where we go. How should leaders decide what work gets automated, what needs augmenting, and what should remain distinctly human?
You start with what problem you're solving. So it's really basic, right? You start with, who are you serving? And again, you might be serving me, you might be serving someone like my mum. And in the workplace, you can have up to 7 generations. It's getting really old now. So you do start with what problem you're solving, who. There are elements for me, if it can be done by automation, right? So is it rule-based? Is it, the general stuff we used to do, is it automation or is it RPA? There are different types of AI. So it's not always, so the different, but are you happy with a non-deterministic output? Are you happy to not have a consistent output? Because Parag, Tim, and Chantelle, if you were speaking to us on the phone, we probably say slightly different stuff. We're okay with that. And so it's the question of, once you know the problem, who you're serving, how is that work best done? How are the decisions best made? And then on top of that, for me, for capacity, like I have several processes that I'm doing with the organization. Is it a time sequenced? Is it manual, so that they can control what's coming through to them? Like I have a humanized marketing or my digital twin. It's when I want it and need it. But then there are some which are constantly going. It's designing for your capacity. And then the other piece, the biggest piece, was the human design around designing for positive emotion. Like one of the biggest cases, again, public in my research, AXA, they really asked the fraud squad, what would make you happy? I mean, we've all know the IKEA example at the moment where they've gone to customers, but what would make you happy? And for them, it was identifying more fraud to get a higher bonus. Who knew FS&I was so money driven? And they identified 10 million. So every year, 10 million more fraud. And so where do you add it? Like, actually, this is where the simulations, but I do more human simulations, right? Like, you really need to be with the people, and then you will solve it in the best way that's for those people. And then those people also identify limitations, opportunities, and bias. And you might need to. The other thing I would say is, two things that need to come in is RAG model, retrieval augmented generative model, to address bias. And where you have on-prem, what models are using. So I did a panel with the Swiss judicial system, and their on-prem models being used higher than the private model, and they're getting more benefits of that. So there's many things, but how do you best solve the problem? You also have to take into account your OPEX and your CAPEX. And there's a cost piece that we're now seeing coming through. Organizations, and I'm talking, Microsoft, if Microsoft can't afford to use their own AI, Houston, we have a problem. So there's the cost piece of how is it best served? Can you afford an uncontrollable cost of doing something a human could think about? Where is it best done? Or do you have an on-prem model to do certain things? There's all these other little nuances. Sorry, I went a little bit too deep. I'm a bit geeky like you, Tim. These questions.
Yeah, and I didn't want to get into the cost of tokens and all that kind of stuff relative to subscription. Yeah, we'll pause there for the moment. But I see a few of us, like Tanya and others, are all nodding around. Yeah,
it is a real decision in automation and AI, and so that's where me, like OD, get together with finance, get together with your CIO, your CFO, because these are the conversations at board level, because there are shit's scared right now.
Yeah, well, some organizations have blown $500 million on tokens without realizing it, and that was in the first quarter, and they had $500 million for their whole year. And I thought, oh, right, okay.
You need to come to like Reply or me to say, hey, let's redesign how work gets done optimally with the right metric.
Yeah. So there's all of these wonderful questions. So let's go to Tim. How should leaders decide what works gets automated, what needs augmenting, and what should remain distinctly human? Just reminding you of the question, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. So in the old days, we would look at like what people are doing, and then we would a little bit like tailor, analyze it, and look what AI can do better. But that is no longer the question we're trying to answer, because we try to redesign the processes, and now it depends on your maturity level. So as well, we said we would not make it too technical, but there's a big difference between generative AI and agentic AI. So in our system, we distinguish between level 3 and 4. Level 3 is simply a radiologist is asking the system to interpret the X-ray. So human on top of the loop. That's not going to cost you too many tokens, because every time an action is initiated by the human is on top of the loop. If you go one level further and you automate the whole hospital, and you say, well, patient comes in and the agents are going to decide and talk among themselves, and they're going to order more X-rays and whatever. Of course, it's not only the cost of the medical system, but also the cost of the AI. It gets much higher. So you've designed a totally different system in which the AI is deciding to call upon other AI, and all of a sudden it spirals. So it's really important to see what the process is, how AI fits in. That's basically the answer to your question, that certain things will always be human, like strategic, creative, and care. Specifically in hospitals, it's important that people speak to people. I want to be operated by the best AI surgeon, but I don't want to talk to it. I want to talk to a human if I really need critical care. So it still is the same thing. Like it starts with, as you call it, Chantal, the problem, and I call it the ambition. But the ambition goes a bit further into like, how far do we trust the AI? And there are legal considerations that you cannot overcome. So still, if you're a radiologist, you need to sign off because the author of the AI is never going to be liable if something goes wrong with the patient. So you have the legal considerations, but you can do much more with AI than people currently think. But it needs to be a phased approach. So yeah, that's kind of the answer.
Yeah, fantastic. Parag, what about you? What's your response?
Yeah, so we start with a hypothesis-based rather than just assuming it's an addition, augmentation, human only. It's all those are possible
Yeah,
futures. The question then becomes whether it's a problem you're solving or the ambition you're trying to achieve, something in between. What does it take to address what's the pressing need at the moment is? So as an example, one of the organizations we're working with, Parliamentary Health and Ombudsman Service, who handle a lot of complaints, we have created a AI generated summaries, case summaries, where caseworkers can get to heart of the problem based on the evidence that is submitted and the complaint that is submitted very quickly. Typically, it has reduced their time to read the documentation by 30%, 50%. But that doesn't take away the human judgment a caseworker needs to apply to make a decision, to decide on the outcome. AI simply signpost, highlights gaps, and all the other things. It has gone through extensive bias testing. But they're having a separate issue now, which is making us rethink the process. The complainants now are using AI to write complaints,
yeah.
which is
It's
creating a
an arms
situation
race.
which is creating a situation where complaints are getting more complex than they should be because AI is hallucinating. What should have been a two-page complaint is becoming 10-page complaints. So
Yeah.
caseworkers are now finding challenging. So what do we do now? Use AI to detect AI text? Potentially. So my point being is now our problem has shifted quite quickly, considerably on, well, what do we do upstream to avoid downstream problem? That wasn't in the initial consideration when we started to design AI systems. So our best approach is hypothesis-based to short focused discoveries, experimentation, and the answer emerges really from that rather than having a predeterministic idea that, oh, it's an automation, oh, it's an augmentation, oh, it's a human only. Quite often it's a mixture of those. The other thing we have found, as is common with all process improvement initiatives, especially in the knowledge work, service industries, what people actually do varies a lot, actually. Even though you can standardize as much as you like the processes, there is a natural variance. There's a natural variation in how people actually perform. They always find their workarounds. And it's hard to understand that unless you work with those individuals on a day-to-day basis, because in some cases, AI becomes an absolute no-go, especially with some ethics and responsible use. In some cases, you can. So that's how we normally approach hypothesis-based experimentation, try, test, get feedback, and then scale. But the challenge with technology changing very fast, by the time you have done that, something else has emerged. So it becomes quite challenging. And then last thing that constrains us, especially in public services, back to the token usage, it's hard to operationalize the cost. Everything is capital. It creates massive challenge to scale AI at the moment, is our
Yeah, yeah,
experience.
certainly. Looks
There's
like
one
Chantelle wants to
baseline
come
thing we
in.
need
Yeah.
to do before we go and let free is that, because we're all talking, and I've been on many panels then when we're talking AI, and I think Parag and Tim and I are talking about workflows. But many people, when we're talking about OD, they're talking about chatting with AI. And I think the other consideration for me is that human beings were never designed to chat to a machine for 8 hours a day. And we're seeing burnout, 45%, we're seeing cognitive dissonance. And so I think the consideration is like, if it is a workflow, you're doing workflow, but many organizations are currently stuck in the chat. I think it's really important to make sure that we distinguish what do we mean, as you were doing, Tim, as well, around generative AI, agentic AI, like we cluster AI all together. And even when now we're talking workflows, I can hear us talking workflows, but maybe the 27 people listening are like, oh yeah, I've got Copilot in and I'm chatting with Copilot. This, I think, will evolve and change, because that's where we get to token usage, and we're not really getting productivity. Usage is not productivity. So, yeah.
100%.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. It's certainly in my mind as well. Yeah, so one of the things I'm taking out of that portion of the conversation is ultimately the process you use to get to the future defines the future you get. So, really much talking with the people. So it's a human-centered design process rather than making assumptions and overlaying stuff, but actually working with people to find out, what is the usage and needs from your customers? What is the experience you're trying to create? What is your colleague experience and what their capabilities are? Meaningful work, creating space for well-being, depending on risk and the model, you've got to think about all of these things. It also reminded me of one of the things that NASA talked about, and this is well before AI came out, and when they're firing people up into space and across to the moon, they were thinking, well, we can actually automate all these things. And then their scenarios, and when they got them into a prototype and got the astronauts to work things through, they realized that some of the stuff that was automated, they actually had to bring back to manual, because the astronauts lost track of it and then forgot how to fix things when things went wrong.
Yep.
So they realized, hang on, if we just have a button that they have to press every sort of 5 minutes or whatever it is, it means that they've still paying sufficient attention to this thing that if it goes wrong, it could be catastrophic for the whole mission. And I think the same principle aligns here as well. So what are those things that if they catastrophically go wrong, we can still fix, we can work it around, even though we may be using AI? Yeah. Okay. So that was a fantastic round one, and I'm reminding all of the people who have joined us, if you want to pop a question into chat, I'd love to hear from you, and then we can discuss those, get you to join the conversation and come in. So please pop your question into chat, and then I'll call you to join the conversation, and we'll go from there. But while you're thinking and typing, I'm going to get us into round two. So is everyone ready for round two? Well, ding, 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 here we go. It's all about governance. And Chantelle, we're going to start with you again. So let's bring in governance. What does good enough governance for AI look like, especially in complex and regulated environments like the public sector? I'm going to add a twist as well, making sure we take account of EDI.
I mean, honestly, I just don't. I read the question, but I read the question this morning, and I have had CEOs contact me to say in proposals they got a small governance. I was like, I have no idea what that means. You need governance that's scalable. So I guess good enough to me would be allowing your organization to be able to scale. So you need to be able to understand what AI systems you have. You need to map the hell out of that. But that's not that easy, because you probably have a shadow AI.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to have the transparency. Your governance is not compliance. So I have people coming to me like, it's not compliance. It is being able to create the transparency of what actually is going on in your organization, to have the transparency for people and the culture that they can go, okay, so tell me how that works, so that they can see. I was with Small PDF 2 weeks ago, and they can see, well, what would that mean? Can we bring that in? It's the transparency at the executive level to be able to have your red lines about what you're willing to do and not willing to do, for example, in terms of customer data and things like that. They don't take in, customer data. It's the ability that each department can then collaborate. So you've got essentially not a board, like an AI governance board across departments that are having conversations that can actually sign off things in motions when people come with a proposal. Like, I want to do this with AI. I want my department to have digital twins. Yeah, but if you have no one in which to go to for that, so in essence, it's scalable AI governance to me, and there's a whole program underneath that I lead for Europe. So it's I don't know what good enough means. For EDI, we're just not there yet because actually, frankly, it's actually quite scary how much bias is allowed in organizations. And I go to sessions, and pharmaceutical companies have taken AI to do clinical trials, but women not been in clinical trials until the 90s, but yet we're going hell bent on that. It's only in Japan where we have a law where they have to be representative of the population. So EDI actually is frankly out the window at the moment. It's not even in the room. Should it be? Yes. But this is where AI will begin to break and the litigations will come through. The law will start. AI governance, be it China and EU AI Act, which now has been simplified and going through, and Switzerland will ratify, it will start to hit the road. So scalable.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let's get a quick comment from Parag and Tim, and then I'm going to go to a question on the chat.
Yeah, sure. So from a governance perspective, yeah, and again, I work in public sector, I lead the practice. So there are all the good standards and frameworks that we need to reference to: the UK AI playbook, cybersecurity, data protection, ICO. I can go on and on. There's a whole list of 10 different things. But it has to be slightly adapted to the organization's use cases for AI, because like I said earlier, everything doesn't and cannot be AI driven. So what are the use cases? What are you trying to do? How the governance frameworks work? Secondly, what's the process of governing, whether these are committees or bodies, whatever setup an organization has? How do you make decisions? How do you let innovation happen at the same time, have enough oversight of the work that gets done? A lot of people nowadays use AI without organizations even knowing it. And we found out quite a lot in our work with clients. So how do you not stop, but how do you ensure there are no data breaches and other bad press that happens? And the third is in terms of the AI itself, on the governance point, things change, things rapidly evolve. There's always the small print in different LLM models, terms and conditions that people quite often overlook. Sovereign models, use of data residencies, all the technical stuff. But you have to do that first before you embark on any AI initiatives. Satisfy yourself that you got the right data controls, because we have found in a couple of use cases, data residency in UK was a problem for a public sector body, and we had to stop using that model completely and go to another one. So it's a combination of your frameworks that exist. Let's use those, have a process in place of governing, but make sure the innovation still happens without constraining.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Tim, yourself.
Just a little bit of a philosophical remark. I see a battle between the greatest good for the greatest number of people versus human rights and individual rights. And we in Europe have a different opinion around that than people in Middle East or Far East like China. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I do say that it's very interesting at this turning point in human history, which model is going to prevail. So Europeans tend to really highly value the individual right, and it borders on EDI. Whereas if I'm in Saudi, they simply say it works or it doesn't work. Now they also have Saudization, so they want to put their own people first, and they are looking at regulation to develop their own country. But they do it on a much more pragmatic way. So what I see in Europe is that we have a big divide between the practitioners and those that are making the rules. And I think it's upon us to help also rule makers understand the macroeconomic picture and our economic situation that we have in Europe. If you look at the car manufacturing industry, there's much to be said about that the Chinese were extremely smart in funding their own industry. But there's also an element in self-driving cars, in the use of AI. And well, if you're going to be a little bit more pragmatic with it, you might gain economically, and ultimately economics counts also when it comes to ethics.
Thank you. Thank you. Just in light of time, I won't try and summarize or make any comment there. I'm going to move us straight into a question from Henrietta. Henrietta, do you want to join us and just propose your question around climate, culture and climate impact?
I come in.
Henrietta, are you there? Okay, maybe not. So I'll ask the question. She's saying she's interested to know where culture and climate impact are in these conversations.
Culture is everywhere. Culture is part of your AI governance. If you don't have your trust, then no one is going to speak up. Culture is your adoption. Environment and climate is in everything that I do. Actually, for me, environment equals OPEX and CapEx, if anyone has ever seen my posts. But my workflows are designed by the most optimal model. The most optimal model means you've reduced your tokens. It's by the most optimum design, means you reduce your tokens and your usage. If you're looking at on-prem, versus using a private model, all of these things are actually your ROI. So they feature into the design. However, for most companies, I would say ESGs have gone out the window. There's no point even doing the report, to be frank, an ESG report at the moment, because I don't know why we're wasting time, paper, or money unless we all get together and have a real conversation on that. But in terms of my clients and what I do and I choose, it's significant. The other piece for culture is even with governance, which to me slightly needs to shift from what we're doing because it needs to be scalable. Even if you have documentation, you actually need a named individual of who is the person that you can go back to that explains the AI decision that was made to do that, which means you need a culture of not having blame. Right. So to actually get things working, because it's not like you put in the model and, hey, yeah, everything works for good. There's always going to be revisions. There's always going to be changes, Parag.
Yeah. Yes, there's
Massive.
prerequisites. Yeah.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah, thank you. Parag, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, like with any organizational change, culture is so critical to that. And AI is the same, really. You're introducing new technology, new way of working. What changes fundamentally with AI is the fast-moving pace of advancements, especially with generative AI or agentic AI that we've been talking about. So you need a cultural experimentation. The deterministic way of working, oh, this is our problem, that's the solution, let's go about it, doesn't really work. You have to constantly experiment, try different things. The organization has to be slightly open, the leadership and the staff as well, to it's not perfect, it doesn't quite give us the output what we need, okay, let's persist, let's try different things. So that has to really come at forefront. It's no good saying on paper we are innovative, we like experimentation. In practice, that doesn't happen when we work with clients, especially in public sector, because they're constrained. Not that they don't want to do it, they're constrained by budgets, they're constrained by ways of working, the hierarchies that exist. People who want surety, assurance, based on milestones, based on outputs, not outcomes, not how we are fundamentally reworking. So if that doesn't change culturally, AI tends to struggle in terms of implementation, generally, is our observation.
Thank you. Tim, just very briefly from you, please.
Very quickly, culture is about dilemmas. So if you look at boardrooms, they need to decide do they want to be customer-centric or product-driven, etc. Now, it's amazing that if you look through that lens, that AI can help. So even in this conversation, if the AI had been listening in, it would have been very capable of producing a list of the dilemmas. And ultimately, dilemmas are not about choosing; it's about finding a third way. And even the AI can come up with suggestions on how to find that middle ground. So AI is amazing in transcribing the conversation, interpreting it, and then being a provocateur, probably better than we are in this room. And then ultimately, people need to decide based on what the AI has suggested.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So I think we're going to do one very quick closing round just because of the time. We did say we'd end on one or at one to give people time back into the day, make sure that you can crack on with your next meeting or hopefully take a lunch. But let's get into the real practical side of things, practical takeaways for leaders. In one sentence each, what should public sector leaders start doing, stop doing, continue doing as AI becomes part of the transformational work? Tim, do you want to start?
I would say be humble. Don't exclude anything. A lot is more possible. So reverse mentoring. Younger generations tend to embrace things quicker than older generations. So be open if you're in a senior position. And don't think about whatever is impossible. Just ask the question to your staff, what can be done.
Thank you. Chantelle?
For me, it's human design session from the leaders to the people, speaking to the people, but with a view of long-term investment, because even though it's public sector, they unfortunately increasingly have just short-term targets and they're making the wrong decisions.
Yeah, thank you, Chantelle. Parag?
Yeah, it's more a reminder rather than anything new that we have always struggled and failed with any organizational change, technology implementation projects. Case studies are rife about that. Let's not repeat those mistakes. Let's do this properly. Let's approach this from a perspective of what does it take to adopt this new piece of technology for a better outcome and better good of the public. So let's avoid those lessons learned or not implemented and then do it properly, because otherwise this will be another car crash waiting to happen. It's already happening in some places.
Yeah. And for me, I think I'd add in, just from an elegant simplicity perspective, what can you subtract before you add? Because adding equals noise. Let's think about what we can take away so we can get down to the basics of value creation and what we're really here to do, and how we then create an environment in which our people can thrive and the organization succeeds. So everyone, it's just been wonderful. Thank you so much to Tim, Parag, Chantelle, and for all of you who've engaged in this conversation. All the questions that you put into chat, we'll certainly reflect on those and see what we can add into the next elegant simplicity. Sorry, not elegant simplicity, but rather the next emerging practice conversation. And if what we've explored today resonates, this is exactly the space that Triquant is working in, together with our partners, helping organizations redesign for high-performing human AI teams and integrated AI-enhanced operating models, so in a way that is practical, ethical, and grounded. We'd love to continue this conversation. Do get in touch if you'd like to learn more. And what we'll do is we'll summarize this and share this report out to all those who have attended. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.